All right, welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pusher podcast. What a race weekend we just witnessed. Let's jump right into it because there is so much to talk about. Brandon, how are you feeling after what we just witnessed in Australia?
I'm feeling great. It was an awesome race. I did attempt to stay up for it on Saturday night here in America, and I fell asleep watching the race. And then I woke up early on Sunday morning and finished watching it. But yeah, it was an awesome race. You know, things are like completely shaken up now, so it was wild. It was a wild weekend down under, as they say.
Despite what we said in the last podcast where we predicted that both of us would go to sleep, I too stayed up for the race and figured that you had fallen asleep at some point because you stopped responding to my text when we were talking about if we were both watching it. I had
Yeah.
driven to see a friend's wedding earlier that day, had some caffeine to drive home safely. So I was wired and I was like, Formula One's like 30 minutes away. I have to stay up and watch it. And then I watched the entire thing. But what a race. If you had to describe that race in one sentence, your one sentence, one down, what would it be?
More of a question. Is this the first crack in the Red Bull dominance? I don't know. Maybe so. It's Red Bull's first. Well, first of all, let's talk about it. Max Verstappen retired from the race on lap three. Um, insane.
Insane.
Red Bull's first mechanical failure since 2 years ago, almost to the day, when Max retired early in the Australian Grand Prix 2022. Um, but yeah, apparently the issue was that his brake got stuck at the start, and obviously the brake was on the entire time he was trying to drive the car, and so that made it difficult to drive. And eventually the brake caught on fire and exploded. So yeah, I don't know. Things are completely shaken up. Championship is a little closer now. So I don't know. That's kind of my one sentence rundown. My big takeaway is obviously Max Verstappen getting out of the race on lap three.
Yeah, obviously that has to be the big thing to talk about, Max Verstappen retiring so early in that race. But it is interesting to see that they did have these reliability issues this early in the season, um, after not having any at all last year. And when we saw this Red Bull design and how radical it is and how new it is, that was one of the questions that got asked is there going to be reliability issues with this Red Bull? And so I think maybe Red Bull can find some comfort in the fact that it wasn't an engine issue, it wasn't a cooling issue per se due to the design of that car, but maybe there could be something in that car that makes it more susceptible to reliability issues in the future.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, I think last year we were kind of all thinking like, at some point someone else is going to win a race because, Max is going to have some kind of like mechanical issue at some point down the road. Usually that, I mean, happens once during a season. Not every team is bulletproof, as they say, and it's, kind of inevitable to assume that at some point you're going to have some margin of error and, take a mechanical failure at some point, and they didn't last year, which was pretty impressive. And so to see that happen this year is kind of interesting. But I definitely agree. I think Red Bull are probably happy that it's not an engine issue, it's not a cooling issue, it's not something a piece of the design of the car that caused it to overheat or whatever. But definitely definitely interesting. So
Yeah, I think like a big thing to think about whenever you see Max Verstappen have a retirement like that is how big of a swing in a championship it is because pretty much every race that Max Verstappen finishes, it's him getting 25 or 26 points. And so
yeah.
not only is that him losing that in the drivers' championship, but that's Red Bull losing it in the constructors' championship as well. And then you take the points that, say, Carlos Sainz in this instance gained from finishing first instead of second, that's 7 extra points. So that's a 33, 32 point swing in Ferrari's favor. And if Red Bull keeps having these issues and Sergio Perez keeps not being able to finish in second when they have these issues, then that's a big swing, not only in the drivers' championship, but in the constructors' championship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you think about it, it's not just like you just said, it's not the points that Max is losing, but it's the points that whoever wins is gaining. Or, in the constructors uh, championship, I mean, we were going from two Red Bull 1-2s, which, likely could have been the case had Max not had any issues and Checo not had any issues this weekend, to a Ferrari 1-2. So you just subtract kind of whatever Checo got, which I think was like 10 points or something like that. And then, it's like a almost a 50-point swing in terms of the Constructors' Championship but it's huge. And, if Max had won this weekend, it would have been that much more, out of reach for everyone else. But when he has kind of a hiccup this early on in the season, it's kind of brings things a lot closer, makes the championship battle that much more exciting, which we didn't get a lot of last year. So Max won both of those championships by himself. So yeah,
Yeah, I think that flows super well into like our first key takeaway from this race was is the championship back on? I think we saw from this race that Ferrari are a clear second best, and maybe they're not as far back as we thought, but the real question is there any other team that is still in the mix for that fight? Like McLaren, are they still in there? I mean, they finished third and fourth in this race, but they never really felt like a threat to Ferrari. Obviously, once Ferrari got that 1-2, it kind of felt solidified. McLaren maybe had a bit of a strategy blunder, waiting so long to let Lando back past Oscar after their pit stops. What are your thoughts on McLaren and where they fall into that championship mix?
I still think they're a step back from Ferrari. Um, I agree. Maybe had they let Lando through earlier, they could have had a chance at a second place. But I think they're still a step back. And honestly, like this weekend makes me think that Ferrari is, maybe not as far back. I would agree with you on that. I mean, even in FP3, they were kind of matching Red Bull in the long runs. And I mean, I know Max had an issue at the front, but Carlos Carlos was able to kind of keep with him in the first lap. And um, even if Max hadn't had that issue, I don't know that it would have been as big of a gap as it has been the first two weekends. So it'll be interesting to see how it kind of continues on. But we've got a little bit of a fight, so we'll see what happens. And but for as far as McLaren goes, I think they're a little bit of a step back still, but definitely there to kind of pick up the pieces if stuff at the front goes wrong. So
Yeah, I think they're definitely still a step back, but I think it might not be that bad of a thing for them to be in the position that they're in right now. Like we've seen the development path from McLaren over the past few years just be insane. Even from
yeah,
2021, 2022, and 2023, like they've had maybe not the best car, and then we've seen the development over the course of the season. And by the end of it, Lano's getting podiums or they're fighting, four places higher in the constructor standings than they were when they first started the season. And so if this is their starting point before getting into all of that development success that they've had, then I think they could easily still be in the championship. If they think of how much they climbed the second half of last year, and if they
yeah,
can have that momentum with a better car higher up the field, with Oscar Piastri showing clear improvements from last year, Lando Norris still being an incredible driver, and he showed that off this weekend. I think they're in a really good place to still make some noise if they have that development success again.
yeah. I definitely agree, and I think that relative to Red Bull the past couple of years, I mean, I would argue that McLaren's been maybe more impressive in terms of in-season development. Red Bull's just started, so far in front of everyone else that they don't need to develop that much in the season. So um, that might be something that Red Bull kind of has kind of gotten used to not doing so much of the past couple of years. So maybe we can see those teams that have been, trying to build up like McLaren, Ferrari, have some great in-season development. And, I'm excited for the back half of this season. I think it'll be, you know, after this weekend, I'm tentatively saying this is probably going to be the closest season we've seen in 3 years. So we'll see.
Yeah, it was just one race. I don't want to get my hopes up too high, but the championship could be back on. My one sentence rundown. What a comeback from Carlos Sainz. Obviously, we talked about Max Verstappen being out. The man who was there to pick up the pieces was not his teammate Sergio Perez, but was the man who started in P2, Ferrari driver Carlos Sainz. 2 weeks ago, he was in a hospital bed having surgery, getting something removed from his body, and he just won a race. That's crazy. I mean, just the performance from him to come back this weekend and to qualify P2 ahead of his teammate, who is known to be incredible at qualifying. It was Carlos Sainz that put in the lap to allow him to take advantage of Max Verstappen's retirement. And then after that, it never felt like Carlos Sainz was under threat. I mean, people said you take Max Verstappen out of the race and you have an incredible race, fight for the lead, hands down. And it was a really good race, but there wasn't a fight for the lead at all. Carlos Sainz drove
Yeah.
off into the distance. I remember the first stint, people were having tire wear like crazy and just fastest lap after fastest lap after fastest lap for Carlos Sainz. He drove out, gave himself almost a pit stop lead over his teammate. He could do whatever he wanted with strategy at the front. I mean,
Yeah.
Carlos Sainz, no better advertisement to any team having an open seat in 2025 than what he just did this weekend. Just what an all-around performance from him.
Yeah. It was absolutely fantastic. And we've been saying this for a few weeks now, but like, you know, Carlos is going to be driving with a chip on his shoulder, and he absolutely has started this season. And he couldn't have had a better weekend. And it was just an amazing drive, especially to come back from surgery. I mean, I was watching him get out of the car at the end of the race in Parc Fermé, and you could tell that he was moving a little gingerly. Not as he didn't look as quite excited as somebody who just won a Formula One Grand Prix normally is, but I think just goes to show that he still was in a little bit of pain, and he pulled through. And the tire degradation on the circuit, I think was really high, maybe higher than what some teams expected, but it just shows you how much clean air in the front did for Carlos to be able to kind of drive off during the first stint and just pound in those laps. And yeah, it was a great race from Carlos, and it was very great to see him win a race. I like watching Carlos Sainz win races. I mean, he's like the only driver to win a race outside of Sergio Perez that isn't Max Verstappen in like two plus years or something like that. So,
So crazy. I think if you're Mercedes, if you're Red Bull, you have to be thinking about Carlos Sainz for next season. I mean, I could see why maybe they weren't thinking about him originally. If you're in Red Bull, you've got some people in your camp that you like. If you're Mercedes, you've got some people in your camp that you like. But just seeing the way that he's performed this year, seeing the way that he doesn't crack under pressure. I think Monza 2020, chasing down Pierre Gasly, and even though he finished second, didn't make a single mistake in that race when he was driving through traffic to get there. Singapore last year, what a race under pressure with three drivers behind and purposefully giving Lando the right amount of DRS and Carlos Sainz win that race flawless. And then the opportunity is presented to him again, this week, and he wins the race flawless again. If you're one of those big teams, you've got to be thinking about Carlos Sainz to be in your second seat.
yeah, there's like you just said, no better advertisement. I mean, it was a flawless race, and as soon as he was in the lead, there was truly no doubt, no threat to him for all 58 laps. So it was a great race, but Carlos had it under control the whole time. And Red Bull, Mercedes, uh, I don't know, Ferrari's probably maybe sweating a little bit, like, oh man, we just cut this guy. Um, but I mean, they're already locked in, so too bad for them. But yeah, Red Bull, Mercedes definitely have to be on the watch now. I mean, you know, Carlos, I think through the first three races has been with this win and his qualifying here, I would say he's been the better Ferrari driver so far this season. So, um, yeah, I don't know where we'll see him in 2025, but definitely gonna be on the grid somewhere.
I hope we don't see him in that Sauber. It would just be such a waste. I know there's the chance of the Audi success the next year, but I don't want to see him driving around in 16th for a year. It would just be such a waste. If you're Ferrari, you're probably okay knowing that you have Lewis Hamilton signed, but based on
Yeah.
his performances this season, hasn't been great. I know he's one of the GOATs, but everybody reaches their fall off at some point when they reach a certain age, unless you're Fernando Alonso and you're just a rookie forever. But that's a conversation for another video. We're not here to say that Lewis Hamilton is washed on a Monday afternoon after watching one race in Australia. But Carlos Sainz, what a weekend. Someone who didn't have a great weekend and has kind of allowed us to think that Carlos Sainz might have a shot at a Red Bull seat was Sergio Perez. We talked last week that the Sergio Perez fall off could be coming. And I don't want to say we predicted it, but not a great weekend from Sergio Perez. He qualified P3. That's not terrible. Gets the penalty. which is just such a trend that we've seen from Sergio Perez is that he makes a mistake on a non-race day that just hampers his whole weekend and sets him off on the back foot. He had no impact on the race at all. He did have some floor damage, so I don't want to like discount that. And, that could have cost him, we don't know how much pace that could have cost him. But still, in a Red Bull, you should be able to make up some ground on the Ferraris and McLarens ahead. And he just wasn't a threat at all. He got past Fernando and George Russell, and I said, dang, he might go win this race. I hope he doesn't, but he might. And then
Yeah.
he just stayed like 7 seconds behind Oscar Piastri for the remainder of the race.
Yeah. Essentially, he inherited the position, the P5 from Max retiring, and that was it. He just stayed there for the rest of the race. Was kind of the net result of that. But because yes, he qualified P3 and 3 place grid drop put him in P6 to start the race. So, I mean, he obviously moving around a little bit with the pit stops and everything, but yeah, he didn't really seem to be. It was like he hit a wall, which is I think something that I've definitely seen in the past. And um, I do want to give maybe Sergio a little bit more credit. Say, he did have the floor damage. We don't know how much that would have lost. He put in a great effort in qualifying. P3 was good, but I mean, at the end of the day, you got to look at the end result, and that was a P5 in the race in a weekend where they needed him to win, probably, and he didn't deliver. So
Red Bull, the only thing they're asking from Sergio Perez is to be there to pick up the pieces when Max is out of the race, something happens to him, has a mistake, has a long pit stop, whatever. And we've praised him the last 2 weeks and being like, we kind of wrote him off, didn't put him in our predictions. And then he delivered. He got P2s for the last two races. And, we thought it was a great start to the season for Sergio Perez. And then the one race in the last 2 years where Max Verstappen is out of the Grand Prix, Sergio's nowhere. And yes, he had the floor damage, but he put himself out of position by getting the penalty. And even if he qualified and got to stay P3, there's no guarantee that he could have gotten ahead of Carlos Sainz and won that race. And so
yeah,
maybe this was the better outcome for him in general because it might have looked even worse on him if it was him in P2 when Max retires and he couldn't go win the race. And so maybe him finishing in the middle of nowhere and having this damage was the better outcome for Sergio Perez at the end of the day. But overall, just not a weekend to remember for him. And if you do remember it, it's not for the right reasons.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, definitely something Sergio is probably trying to forget, and hopefully he can turn it back on and get another P2 in the next race, but we'll see.
We will see. Let me take you back. Thursday night for us, Friday for the rest of the world. FP1. Alex Albon puts it in the wall. Same place he put it in the wall last year.
Yep.
Car damaged beyond repair. They got to send it back to headquarters to get ready for the next race. Williams only has one chassis. So you're like, well, Logan Sargent flying the flag for Williams this weekend. Not true. They give that chassis to Alex Albon. Happy birthday, Alex Albon. You're racing Logan's car. But he didn't score any points. There's three DNFs in front of him, and he still couldn't get it into the points. He qualified P12, so that would have put him P9. But outside the points, was it worth hurting Logan's confidence for Alex Albon to not even score any points?
I don't know. Looking back on it, I gotta say that it was the wrong call. I mean, I know Logan hasn't produced, but you know, give him his shot at least. You know, that was kind of my initial reaction. I like Logan. I think he's a decent driver. Obviously, he hasn't produced very good results thus far in his career. But I was excited at first to hear that maybe he'd have a chance. Not being compared to Alex this weekend, but then, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough because you watch the interview of Logan talking about it, and he very clearly states that it's the hardest moment of his career, which is obviously it would have been a really tough pill to swallow. Basically, your team saying, "Hey, if we got to choose between the two of you, we don't think you're good enough." So it's tough, and I don't know at this point if you're looking back on it as someone in Williams saying, "Yeah, man, that was definitely the right call." There's at least it's at least up for debate.
Yeah, I feel like if if Alex Albon did score points, maybe we would be saying that Williams made the right call. And so obviously you can't let the outcome of this like determine how you see the decision because the decision was made either way, regardless if he scores points or he doesn't. But
Yeah.
the fact that he didn't score points, I think hurts a little bit the way that we view Alex Albon because the past couple years we've seen him as this incredible driver who is getting the most out of that Williams, who, is there to pick up the P9s and P10s and score those points. And then you have Yuki Tsunoda and the two Haas's finish in front of him to pick up the available points from those DNFs. it, it should have been him in my mind. Like that
Yeah.
should be the situation where Alex Albon is there to thrive and pick up points and help Williams move up in the constructor standings. He was kind of fighting Nico Hulkenberg for a little bit for the edge of the points and then, fell off a little bit, maybe didn't have the best tire strategy. So I don't know if it just wasn't the best execution from Williams as a whole, but just looking back at this decision, I don't think they maximized the weekend, and I don't know if it was worth sacrificing Logan's confidence for maybe the next 3 or 4 races, and maybe even longer. I wouldn't know how much that would affect a Formula One driver, but it has to be a lot for your team to say
Yeah.
we re-signed you, but we don't think you're going to get points this weekend, uh, and just for them to not score any points this weekend because of that decision. I don't know if the future harm that it might do was worth it.
Yeah. And you kind of got to think about like how much good would a vote of confidence behind Logan have done him for the next 3 or 4 races. Like Williams said, man, Alex crashed out. So, we're going all in on you this weekend, Logan. You got to deliver. And what if Logan did? What if Logan picked up a P10? I mean, you know, that would have done worlds for his confidence, probably. But, you know, I don't know. It's a calculated risk that you have to take at that point if you're Williams. So it's impossible for us to say, that was the right or the wrong decision. But yeah, definitely hurts our view of Alex a little bit. And, um, you know, we'll see kind of what it does to affect the team going forward. But hopefully this doesn't have a too big effect on Logan because I do think that he is due for some points soon. And uh, yeah, I was thinking he might have gotten them this weekend, but
If you look back at the last 2 races, I think there's been clear improvement from Logan Sargent this season. He's been racing a lot with Daniel Ricciardo. That's around where he was in Bahrain before he had his car issues with the steering wheel, and then finished ahead of Daniel Ricciardo last time out in Jeddah. Where would that have put him this weekend? In P11, right where Alex Albon finished. So
yeah,
looking back on it, truly might not have been worth it. Let's talk about Fernando Alonso. He received a penalty post-race, 20 seconds added on to his race time, which demoted him down the order to P8. I don't know how I feel about this penalty. Like, yes, his driving was different on that last corner. You can see it in the data. He was a lot slower. He did some different things with his brakes, kind of brake, throttle, brake, throttle. But I don't know if it was deserving of a penalty. What do you think?
yeah. I don't know. I don't know that it was deserving of a penalty either. I mean, it's not like he. I mean, we don't know what Fernando was thinking. Was he trying to back George off a little bit? I don't know. But I mean, 20 seconds is a lot of time. And ultimately, it didn't translate to that many places because of George's crash. Everyone slowed down. So the finishing times are kind of a little bit farther. So net result wasn't as bad as it would have been if, everybody had continued on, I guess. He would have been like P11, P12, I think, had they continued on. But I don't know, 20 seconds is a lot of time. And I guess originally it was a drive-through penalty, which converts to a 20 seconds on your time if you're not able to serve it before the end of the race. But um, yeah, I don't know. He didn't crash with George. George crashed himself. So it's like, what precedent are we setting here? You know, you're protecting somebody who crashed his car from what? From his own inability to manage what the driver in front is doing? I mean, I don't know. It's a really, really tough decision. And I think it's something that kind of the Formula One world will look back on for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think in this situation, you can't put all of the blame on George. You know, Fernando did do something different. George was caught out by it, but I feel like you have to put maybe majority blame on George for not seeing it. You know, I could see a 60-40 racing incident kind of split, maybe even a 70-30 I could be talked into. But,
Yeah,
you know, it's not like Fernando Alonso stomped on the brakes in the middle of a straight, think Max Verstappen to Lewis Hamilton in Jeddah in 2021. Yes, that
right,
was deserving of a penalty. That was a dangerous defensive move, clearly hoping that, you know, they run into the back of you. I don't think
right.
that's what Fernando was doing here at all. And the stewards say, the FIA says that that outcome doesn't determine severity of punishment. They have said that multiple times. That can't be true in this situation. If George Russell doesn't crash, no shot Fernando Alonso gets a penalty. And so I feel like you're
Yeah,
punishing Fernando Alonso because George Russell crashed in that situation. I don't think it was Fernando Alonso's fault that he crashed, but he's the one who's having to bear the brunt of the punishment because the crash happened. If George Russell doesn't crash, Fernando doesn't get the penalty, even though he did the same thing, which is,
right.
I think, unbelievable in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what if George just spins into the gravel, uh, and gets his car going again? George finishes, way down the order. Uh, but I mean, do you even look at what Fernando is doing if George spins? Probably not. I don't know. And yeah, I just think it's ridiculous that, I agree. Fernando was punished for something that, you know, the result of something that happened to somebody else. So I don't
Yeah.
know. It's a tough decision, and I think it's extremely inconsistent. And I don't know where you go from here if another similar situation happens.
Not to be the Formula One fan that belabors this incident again. Silverstone 2021, Lewis Hamilton sends it up the inside on Max Verstappen, doesn't hit the apex of that corner. It's clear that that incident was more Lewis Hamilton's fault than Max Verstappen's fault. He got a 10-second penalty for that. Half the duration for actually hitting the driver and sending him into the wall.
That like probably one of the worst crashes in recent Formula One history. I mean, from a safety perspective, I would say. And 10-second penalty.
The inconsistency is just unbelievable. And I understand that it is hard to compare incidents across tracks, across seasons with different drivers, even on the same track at different corners. But I feel like something has to be done to just improve the consistency of stewarding because this decision just doesn't make sense to me, and I I don't really agree with it.
Me neither. Yeah, it was a tough decision, and you know, I guess we'll see how it impacts the future of Formula One. But interesting for sure.
All right, let's move on to our podium pusher of the weekend. Brandon, who do you think had the best weekend at the Australian Grand Prix?
My podium pusher of the weekend is going to be Oscar Piastri. Um, it was his home race. I've talked about in the past how cool I think it is for drivers to get to race in their home country. Um, Oscar is an Australian, obviously, and he had a great weekend. He qualified P6, ended up finishing the race P4, um, and he let Lando through, even though he had gotten kind of track position on him. They ordered a driver swap from the pit wall, and Oscar obliged pretty immediately, which is a great, you know, team player move. Something definitely hard to do when you are racing in a podium position at your home Grand Prix, which arguably you probably could have picked up the podium if didn't let Lando through looking back on it now. But yeah, he was a great, team player about it. After the race, he said he thought it was the right call. And, obviously it didn't work out with Lando getting P2, but he said it was the right call in the moment and he respected the decision. So I think Oscar had a great weekend and it was awesome to watch him be successful in his home country. I mean, the roar of the crowd as he crossed the line in P4 was pretty incredible. So
Yeah, I think it was a great weekend for Oscar Piastri. Obviously, did qualify and finish behind Lando Norris, but wasn't that far off the pace of him, and I think it shows clear improvement in Oscar Piastri from last season. And I think McLaren have a very strong driver lineup, one of the strongest on the grid. I think they can be encouraged by that. And I think Oscar Piastri, um, letting Lando Norris by says a lot about him, his character, and his willingness to drive for the team. I think that's going to set him up very well, just throughout his career in Formula One, having that willingness to play the team game. I think he was in a position that he probably could have held Lando Norris behind. Their pace wasn't that different, and with the difficulties of following and overtaking at this track at certain times throughout the race with a high tire wear, he probably could have found a way to keep Lando Norris behind and keep that podium for McLaren, but maximizing for the team and at least giving them a chance to go get P2. It didn't work out, but Lando did close up to Charles a little bit and have a chance. And so I think very good weekend for Oscar Piastri overall.
It was, again, just great to watch him be successful in front of his home crowd. I know probably a lot of his family was there, and so imagine that was a very proud moment for them.
My podium pusher of the weekend is Carlos Sainz. We've talked about him a lot, but truly it cannot be anyone else. Just what a weekend. Qualifying P2, getting the win. And, you could say Max had the issue, but Carlos did pass him before he retired, and I think he would have at least been there or thereabouts if Max Verstappen was still in the race, didn't have that issue. I think just a very strong weekend from Carlos Sainz. And, you said it, you seeing him get out of the car after the race was very, very ginger, and he didn't go and jump into his team. He was very stiff and careful getting out of that car. You could see him kind of ease into the weekend on Friday. It was evident that he wasn't at full health. But to pick up the result that he did in the time that he did, in the manner that he did, just what a weekend.
Incredible weekend. I mean, it's been a couple of good weekends for the driver that isn't Charles Leclerc at Ferrari. I was going to say second driver, but I don't know if you look at Carlos as a second driver at Ferrari anymore. I mean, maybe they're at least on a level playing field. But Ollie Behrman, great weekend last weekend, and obviously Carlos had a fantastic weekend this weekend. So,
and not to take away anything from Charles Leclerc, he is having a very good season as well. Is very talented, but anytime he has gone up against Carlos Sainz, he has come out on the back foot. Back marker of the weekend. Who you got?
so this might be a little controversial. I feel like I say that a lot when we're recording these podcast episodes. Maybe I need to dial it back on the hot takes, but my back marker of the weekend, just for the sake of kind of talking about somebody different, and we mentioned him briefly, but Lewis Hamilton is going to be my back marker of the weekend. Obviously, he had an engine issue that caused him to not be able to finish the race. So we can't say that, having a bad race and not finishing was all his fault, because it certainly wasn't, with the engine issue. But yeah, Lewis didn't have a great weekend. He was P9 in FP1, he was P18 in FP2, and P4 in FP3, which is pretty good. Ended up qualifying in 11th, getting knocked out in Q2, which is not something we're used to seeing from Lewis Hamilton. And he obviously didn't finish the race. But when he retired from the race, I believe he was running in P10 at the time, so he wasn't necessarily on for a big amount of points in the race to begin with. But yeah, it just wasn't a great weekend for Lewis. And man, just hearing him in the post-race interview, or actually I think it was the post-qualifying interview that I watched, it just sounded sad, man. It was kind of hard to hear, because like Lewis was, I think it was Lawrence Barretto or somebody asked him, like, what was your reaction to getting knocked out in Q2? And Lewis was like, I don't know, it's not a great feeling, but I'm getting pretty used to it at this point, which is, that's a tough thing to hear Lewis Hamilton say. And, with these performances, it just makes you got to think, like, he's already signed with Ferrari for 2025. So how focused is he on this season? And are these negative results kind of having a bad effect on his ability to perform this season? I mean, he's been out qualified by George 3 times already. So, what's going on with him personally that's causing him to have these issues? Just wasn't a strong weekend for Lewis. And even though I wouldn't say that I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan. It is sad to hear him talk that way.
Yeah, it's definitely sad to see him like that. You have to imagine, even though he is looking forward to this Ferrari move, that Mercedes and his time there has meant so much to him that he wants to go out on the right foot and on a high note. And it's just not what has been happening so far this year. He's had a very tough start to the season and has been outperformed by George for the majority of the year. I don't know if you could say outperformed this weekend with George's result, but for 57 laps, he was outperformed by George. Um, but but yeah, just a tough weekend for Lewis Hamilton. Tough weekend for Mercedes all around. I almost put them as my back marker of the weekend, but went a different direction. But to have one driver have reliability issues, which was funny that we hadn't had any major reliability issues, and then we had the two drivers who never retire, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, both have reliability issues this weekend. But just as a whole, tough weekend for Mercedes. One retirement, one crashing out in the last lap, just, and not really having any pace before then. Like Red Bull's out and George Russell isn't anywhere near the podium. Lewis Hamilton was still going to be on the edge of the points, even with the retirements. And so just a tough weekend for Mercedes, hoping that they can turn it around for the sake of a good constructors fight this year.
And it would be good to see Lewis win one more race at Mercedes uh, before he moves to Ferrari, because I mean, there was just so much winning that he had going on. I think it'd be cool to see him get one more, but we'll see if that happens. Right now, it's not looking too good for Mercedes.
Perfect storybook ending. He gets it at Brazil at the end of the year. Season's almost over. They love him in Brazil. We've seen a Mercedes win there in the past in this era. I'm not confident in it, but it would be cool if it happened.
It's definitely possible, or we'll say it's definitely not impossible.
That's a
But
better way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, who do you have as your back marker of the weekend?
My back marker of the weekend didn't give it to Mercedes, but still went with a team. It's got to be Sauber. I mean, the car's slow. Guan Yu Zhou having his issue in qualifying where he got damage running over a curb and he didn't even know where he got the damage, and then he had to start from the pit lane because they didn't have another front wing of that spec. It didn't really have that big of an impact on his race because the pit stops again were just terrible for that team, and they were saying that they had it all figured out, and then to have a pit stop run 30 40 seconds again, three races in a row, you don't have it figured out. Even their fastest pit stop was almost 4 seconds long. That's just inexcusable in this era of
Yeah,
Formula One to be having this kind of pit stop trouble. Just the car's slow. They can't do anything right in the pit wall. Not looking great for Sauber this year. Honestly, I think they might finish last in the constructor standings if they keep this up.
yeah, and I don't know, like literally just watching the pit stops and watching them struggle with the pit stops. They it literally looked like they were in preseason testing. Like, I don't know. It was just crazy to watch, and listening to the commentators talk about it. And I guess the main issue that they think what's going on is like these cross-threaded wheel nuts that they have aren't like working very well with the wheel guns, and or they're harder to thread or something like that. But it's like, why is this an issue that you're having but nobody else is having it? I've literally never heard of a team having bad wheel nuts or different wheel nuts or hard to thread wheel nuts. I mean, like, why is this even happening is my question. And why are you seemingly okay with it happening? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And, I think I could definitely see them at the bottom of the constructors this season. It makes me feel bad for Valtteri and Joe, but I mean, it's just not a great operation right now.
Yeah, and we've seen teams in the past do things differently during their pit stops to try and gain a tenth or two. But if you're Sauber and you're that slow and you're having this big of an issue with the thing you're trying, scrap it and go back to something more traditional and just make sure that
Yeah.
the pit stops happen in around 3 seconds. And that would be an incredible improvement from what you're doing right now. It's like yeah, if you're fighting at the front and that extra tenth could get you ahead of your competitor on an undercut for the world championship, yeah, try something out, see if it works. But if you're running around in the back and you're, having three retirements and three points paying positions are up for grabs, but it doesn't matter what the pace of your car is because you're keeping them standing still in the pits for 40 seconds each time. It just seems like a waste to me and seems like, an unwise direction to be going for seeking extra pace.
Yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, and I just don't understand it. Why are they even messing with it? I mean, you're completely removing the possibility of your drivers even having a chance by having a 40-second pit stop. I think each one of their drivers had a 30 plus second pit stop during the
Yeah.
race, and it was like, okay, well, maybe if it happened to Valtteri, maybe they get things together, they make sure, okay, we're going to make sure everything's good with Joe. So that way he at least has a chance, or vice versa, whatever. But no, each one of them was like, all right, taking them both completely out of contention. So I don't know.
If it happens in Bahrain, it's excusable because you were trying something. For it to continue to happen is just inexcusable in this era of Formula One. I feel like we've been a little negative at some points of this podcast. We've just been harping on these teams for the mistakes that they made. But a lighthearted part of our podcast is always when we make predictions. Everybody gets to make fun of us for getting them wrong. But this time, it's just me that got them wrong. I had a terrible weekend of predictions. You had a great one. My first prediction was that Oscar Piastri would out qualify Lando Norris. That didn't happen. He almost beat him in the race. Didn't happen. So just I was completely off on that one. And then my second one, I could not have been more wrong about. I said that Mercedes would score the second most points this weekend, even with Max Verstappen retiring and, Sergio Perez finishing down the order. Mercedes scored no points this weekend. So was very off on that prediction, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, looking back on it, they were good predictions. I mean, Mercedes had run better in Jeddah than they did in Bahrain, and this is a track where Mercedes has had a lot of success. Specifically, Lewis Hamilton has had a lot of success in Australia in the past. I mean, even looking back to last year, um, they had success, but yeah, unfortunately, not this weekend. I mean, fortunately for me, because that helps me a little bit in the prediction standings. But yeah. So my first prediction, Sergio Perez does not finish on the podium. Um, so maybe kind of a little bit of Sergio Perez negativity leaking over into my prediction there. But um, I really appreciate Sergio delivering on that for me. He never lets me down when he lets me down, if that makes sense. So it was a great weekend on the Sergio Perez prediction front. And then my other prediction was one of the teams in the bottom five of the constructors scored points this weekend. That did happen. Two of the teams in the bottom five actually scored. Yuki
So
Tsunoda
you
with
could make the
RB.
argument that that's not a point that you didn't get it right because you said one of the teams in the bottom five of the constructor scores points.
I
So
don't know about that. Let's not get too technical with it, but um, I think, yeah, I mean, you don't want to cause any controversy. There's enough controversy caused this weekend at the race itself. Um,
I'll give it to you. I'll give it to
yeah,
you.
yeah, I guess yeah. So yeah, it was a solid prediction weekend for me, but we all know that I'll fall from glory soon. So we're looking forward to that.
Hopefully, I have some better predictions when we head to Japan. But that's all we've got. That is everything that happened at the Australian Grand Prix, what we had to say about it. Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts before we leave these lovely people?
Parting podium thoughts. Looking forward to the next couple races. We got another week-long break, or I guess weekend in between of no racing this next weekend. So got some good content coming out for you guys, and we look forward to talking a lot about the Japanese Grand Prix, predicting that a little bit next week. It'll be a fun episode. But yeah, it's going to be couple of good races coming up. We got Japan and China. So hopefully Japan, where it won't be raining, that'll be exciting. And then China to be there at all is exciting. So that's great. Looking forward to the next month or so of racing. It'll be good.
Super excited for us to go to Japan when it's not the rainy season. I'm worried about the Japanese Grand Prix. There's a chance that we see Max Verstappen win by 40 seconds. He's just angry about his DNF and just laps everybody except the podium and just drives off into the distance and has the best race that we've seen from him ever. So there's a slight worry
It's
about that,
possible.
but I think it'll still be a great race, no matter what. So I'm excited about it. Last year, Japan was after Singapore. Carlos Sainz won that race. Max Verstappen won by like 29 seconds the next week. So hoping that doesn't happen again. Obviously, the Red Bull very much so suits Suzuka, but hoping hoping that things are closer at the top than we originally thought. That this weekend continues to beat the trend for the rest of the season, and Japan is just the next great race and a championship battle that could be on that we didn't think was on.
We'll see. Time will tell. But Formula One is always exciting. So that is great.
Well, that is all we have. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Podium Pusher podcast. If you haven't, wherever you're listening, go ahead and give us a 5-star review, subscribe, follow us. You know, why not? We're going to be putting out a lot of great content, so we're happy that you guys are following along and so thankful for each and every one of you guys. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. We're just so thankful that you guys decided to give us your time of day to be the ones talking to you about Formula One. We will see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. See ya.
See ya.